All right, guys. So in lieu of mandatory meetings, I'm going to just put together a quick voiceover with a full template and give you guys some guidelines on what to put on each slide. In addition to that, I'll give you guys the rubric at the end of this with kind of what I'm expecting. If you guys do want to meet with me, you can, of course, just shoot me an email and I'd be more than willing to meet. The due date for this assignment is I'm going to move it up slightly only because I want you guys to also focus on your individualized training program. This PowerPoint shouldn't be that difficult because essentially what you're doing is converting your literature review now into a PowerPoint. So you guys have all the information. Of course, you can go back into the literature and add things if you'd like, but it shouldn't be that difficult because you already know it and you've written on it. So make sure you have a good title slide. You have to include the title of your paper. There was one or two people who lost points for APA formatting because they didn't have the title on their cover page. So make sure you have your title, name, professor name. Introduction. Get me interested. Get me motivated to want to listen to you speak for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Right? This is your catch. This is your hook. It should be about 60 to 90 seconds, no longer than that. Remember, right, you're not just speaking to me, but imagine you were speaking in front of the class where the class would not know everything about your topic, right? So you got to give us some basic ideas of what you're speaking about. You know, if you're speaking on periodization, maybe a basic definition of periodization at this point would be relevant. And then specifically, why is your topic relevant to cardiovascular training or cardiovascular health? This is kind of a continuation from the previous slide, right? So why is it relevant? And then from here, where is the controversy? If there is one. I use the word controversially loosely, but you know, some of you guys did maximalism versus minimalism. That is a direct controversy. Some of you guys have looked at training principles between sedentary and experienced individuals. So you have to clearly state also kind of where you stand on a continuum. You know, the sedentary versus experienced athlete. Are you going to stand that they should be different, or should they be no different? Because some people might have a different point of view. Maximalism versus minimalism, one side or the other. So you guys can get a basic idea of kind of what I'm looking for here. I want you guys to kind of, based on your research, draw a line in the sand and say, I'm on this side of this argument, and then we will later go into why. Right now, this is just a brief statement why. I think it's important at some point, and usually around here in the slide, you get into some basic operational definitions. So if there's some terms that you're using continuously throughout your slide, you probably want to throw them in here. If you feel like by throwing in the definitions, it'll help the flow of the slide, put them in here now. If you feel like it's a word that maybe you'll refer to once or that you might not even refer to, yeah, something that you might not refer to more than once, don't worry about it. It's not required, but I think it is helpful for some presentations. And this is where you start going into the literature. So remember, you guys were supposed to go over 10 different studies, right? You were supposed to review 10 pieces of literature. And I think some of you guys kind of missed the point of this assignment where, you know, some of you guys might have had maybe one what we would call an RCT with like some empirical data showing that, you know, let's say weight training is good for endurance athletes. And then some of you might have like 5 or 6 opinion-based papers, or maybe something like 5 or 6 stats from the CDC, right? I'm looking for more data that shows this is better than, this is good for this because of some observation. So make sure you're bringing in the appropriate research, right? You're trying to build a story, right? So make sure you're also connecting your viewpoints. I don't want it to be jumping from one point of view to another one without any type of segue. This is really going to be the bulk of the presentation, where it's going to be, you know, upwards of 6 slides. You may want to include one slide per, or one study per slide, or a little bit more in order to cover the appropriate amount of research you're supposed to include. And this last bullet point is very important. Do not be afraid to use graphics from studies. So what do I mean by graphics? I mean tables and charts, right? If you see a chart that shows that, VO2 max improved from here to here, and there's a big bar graph or a line graph, whatever it is, because of some type of intervention, that's incredibly powerful when I am watching a presentation. So whether you kind of copy and paste, whether you just maybe you manually take the data and build your own table, because I've done that, you just show that you've adapted it from another study. I would definitely include this in at least one or two graphics to help engage the viewer. And this is where most people missed the practical application, right? What does the so what? You've written 8, 10, 12 pages on a topic. What does it mean in the real world? I need some sort of take-home point. I want to know that you can go out into the real world, and then at dinner, this topic comes up and you could add something to the conversation. And then the conclusion is just restate your claim. So in conclusion, it appears that X is probably, or the literature supports that X is better than Y because whatever, right? Again, it's all based on your research, and you guys could tell that based on my grading of all of your literature reviews, I'm not so much concerned about the content of your literature review, because you guys are doing the work. You guys are telling me what the research says. I'm making sure you're understanding the content and more so effectively communicating the content to me or to somebody else. There should be a references slide, a question slide. Well, you don't really need a question slide actually anymore. This is an old format from when we were actually in person. So there will not be a question slide on your presentations. And then finally, the grading. Your presentation should be between 10 and 15 minutes. So if you're less than 9, or I'm going to say over 16, I'll give you an extra minute of wiggle room. If you're less than 9 minutes, you'll lose points. If you're over 16 minutes, you'll lose points. Keep it in that window. Always be respectful of people's time. 10 peer-reviewed articles, just like your literature review. So for some of you guys, if I said your research was not peer-reviewed, make sure you're going and getting the appropriate research. I want to see that you're building a strong case. In some instances, looking at both sides of the arguments. I know several of you guys did a fantastic job looking at both sides, saying this study says this, but this study says this, yada, yada, yada. And then obviously the standard stuff applies to a presentation. As far as grading goes, right? So 10% is professional. By just being dressed appropriately, by making sure, like, just a simple tip, be in a separate quarters. Don't be in a room presenting with like your little brother who's like kicking you and screaming, or a baby screaming. Find a quiet place for you to actually put together this presentation and then do a voiceover. Okay. Organizations of slides. Are you following the template I've provided? Can you deviate from this slightly? Absolutely, if you think it makes sense. But I would simply follow this as closely as possible, and you'll get the 15% there. The literature, just by simply having the appropriate amount of literature that I'm asking for, 10, and the relevant literature. Some of you guys probably pulled things that weren't necessarily appropriate. Like for instance, we're talking about endurance athletes. If you pulled a paper on, I don't know, body composition or something that was like loosely related to your topic, it's probably not appropriate for this presentation. And I usually gave you guys some feedback in the comment section. The analysis is your interpretation and your understanding of what the research says. So the other thing that has to really come from here is I need to see what the studies say. Some of you guys gave me these broad views of what the study said, but didn't give me the actual information. Like, what was the study? What was the sample size? Did they have a sample size of 10 or 10,000? What was the methodology? You don't need to spend an incredible amount of time on the methodology, but a quick sentence on the sample size and the methodology really helps me understand what the study was trying to look at. All right, so that's important. And then just basic, 25% is basic presentation skills. I want to see that when you're speaking, you understand your topic. And how are you going to show this? Through speaking eloquently, clear, confident. And then the other last thing is just a visually appealing slide. So like a big thing for me, as with any presentation really, is just no paragraphs. Don't have a big paragraph that you've copied and pasted from your literature review. Do not do that. Have bullet points. You know, this current slide is probably a bad example. Usually somewhere in the neighborhood of like 4 to 8 bullet points is probably appropriate for most slides. Make sure the font is appropriate. And that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions about this presentation, let me know. I'm more than willing to meet with you guys to help.